There's a mea culpa of sorts there. Should she remain as Premier?
No, she can't remain for the simple reason that for 6 years she knew about the commissions that Maguire was taking, what could be termed as kickbacks for his role as a Member of Parliament. Even after Berejiklian had kicked him out of her own party and he'd left the Parliament in disgrace and ICAC had identified clear wrongdoing, the Premier still didn't go down to ICAC or any of the authorities, the police, and give her full account and knowledge of this disgraceful standard. So you can't be Premier of the state and effectively covering up the wrongdoing of another MP. And this is where private and public life collides. It's impossible to unravel the public duty she had from the private affection she clearly held for Daryl Maguire.
She says she hasn't done anything wrong, but do you think that she's turned a blind eye to corruption here?
Well, absolutely. For 6 years, she knew about the commissions. For 2 years, having kicked him out of her own party and having known of wrongdoing shown at ICAC, she still didn't march down to ICAC and tell them a full account of her relationship and everything she knew about Maguire and his dealings. Now, contrast that with her opposite number in politics, Jodie McKay from the Labor Party, who, when member for Newcastle, knew of clear wrongdoing prior to the 2011 election and went down to ICAC and told them of the wrongdoing. Now, that's the right standard for any Member of Parliament. If you know of something that is clearly wrong in the system, that could be corrupt, that could be criminal, you have an obligation, particularly for the Premier of the state, to report that. And because Gladys Berejiklian was in the private relationship, she didn't dob in her boyfriend. I suppose that's one standard, but it clearly conflicts with her public duty as Premier of the state.
Should she get a pass, though, for her formidable work during the pandemic and also the bushfires as well?
Well, you know, you can sort of plead character in these things, but you normally find, Peter, that character is the last fig leaf trying to hide the massive failing of political judgment, the role in the cover-up, the failing of duty, the multiple breaches of the ministerial code of conduct. There's no excuse for this kind of behaviour. There is no excuse for this kind of behaviour. And the equivalent, of course, is imagine 10 years ago what the Liberals would be saying if they found out that Christina Keneally had been sleeping with Eddie Obeid. That is the direct political equivalent. And it's unthinkable 10 years ago. It was unthinkable until yesterday. But it doesn't make it right, it doesn't make it proper, and Gladys Berejiklian must resign.
Is this worse than Barry and the Grange?
Oh, well, Milesworth, that was a bottle of wine that these days looks trivial. This is a guy who was the member for Wagga Wagga, who was doing land deals with the Waterhouse family at Badgerys Creek, who was taking commissions, who was involved in everything that was going on. And at various times he told Gladys Berejiklian this, and she's on tape saying, I don't need to know that. Well, hello, you did know it because he just told you. Your secret boyfriend just told you. It's too late to say, I don't need to know that. When she found out any of this information, she had an overriding responsibility to tell the authorities. She failed in that duty to the people of New South Wales, so she must resign.
You would have seen her high-profile supporters backing her yesterday, folding in behind her. How would you describe that? Could it be suggested that there's something of an uneasy truce at the moment?
Well, it's a bit of a sham when ministers go out defending the indefensible, and you've only got to go back to that comparison I made about Obeid and Keneally. The Liberal Party would have been going berserk at the thought of that if that had been exposed at ICAC 10 years ago. So by any decent political standard, you know, and there's a long list of all the concerns here. You can go to the Chinese money that's involved. The Maguire contacts came out of the Chinese government front group, where this guy was involved, and then the network leads directly to the Premier of the state. So, you know, there's probably a dozen serious breaches or concerns in the behaviour of the Premier, and they can go out and defend that and say she's a nice person and she works hard and all that. Well, so bloody what? If you're not honest and you haven't got integrity in office, you shouldn't be the Premier of the state.
Who should replace her, in your opinion?
Well, the Liberal Party will work that out, but boy, as a independent observer on the crossbench, I've got to say their star talent by the length of the straight is Dominic Perrottet. Now, there's a suggestion that he mightn't have the numbers for factional reasons, but I tell you what, in politics, you need to put your best talent in the most important positions. And if they think any of these Green Liberals on the far left of their party can do the job, they're deluding themselves. That'd be wonderful for One Nation, I can tell you.
But he's got his own
agenda.
He's got his own
Perrottet,
problems with ICAC, right?
Well, you know, that was a mistake that he owned up to. He should have kept ICAC at arm's length. But in terms of policy aptitude and interest and dedication and public presentation, I regard him as their best talent, and he should be Premier in the near future.
Do you think this shows the need for a federal ICAC?
Well, you know, Peter, I served there in the federal parliament, and you never saw any of this. You never saw any of this type of activity, and you normally find in politics, whether you're talking local or state governments, about land use planning. And spivs who try to go out to places like Badgerys Creek and earn a quick buck because they know the development train is on its way, and they look for the easy ride, the inside running to get their hands on that money. You don't see that at federal level. I never saw it in over a decade in the federal parliament, so they might be wasting their money if they go down that pathway. But boy, you'd have to say in New South Wales, ICAC, which has been flawed, some terrible investigations like the one into Margaret Cunneen back in the day. But when they do their job properly, it's definitely in the public interest.